Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spierbauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I woke up so excited this morning to record this episode for a host of reasons, but most of which have to do with the guest who you're about to meet is incredible, an incredible leader, an incredible thinker, and I'm just so thrilled we finally made the time to sit down and record. So I'd love to welcome Matt Miller, the CEO and co-founder of OKO Labs, to Learning Can't Wait. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Haley, great to be here. I also woke up super excited about this morning to get to be here with you.
You know, it's taken us a lot of time to get to the microphone for this episode, but I say there's no better time than the present to do this.
100%. Let's do it.
So in full disclosure, Matt Miller and I know each other as I'm an advisor to OKO Labs. I am obviously going to gush about what Matt and the team are building, and I'm going to let Matt do that. But what I think is really compelling about this conversation is the approach that the team has taken in building the tools for schools that they've built is really unique in the sector, and helps to clear out a lot of noise. So Matt, I'm excited for you to be able to share that story on the podcast today, but I want you to start off by telling us, how did you get here? How did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
Yeah, I love that you always start with that question. For me, it was all about chasing impact. I started my career as an engineer. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was working on some AI and machine learning stuff actually at the time that I found intellectually really interesting, and was applying it to challenges in network security and detecting sophisticated hackers on computer networks. And it was fun. It was interesting. Co-founded a startup back then with my advisor from grad school. But our customers were very large banks. They were the government and the military, who were looking to protect against these very sophisticated threats that we were able to detect. And after a kind of base hit exit from that startup, I was looking for something more impactful, really attracted to the education space, and came to what was then called Wireless Generation and later became Amplify, and spent about a decade getting really steeped in education and education technology. We got to touch a lot of products there, starting from the sort of core of Amplify's DNA and assessment and intervention solutions, and then curriculum solutions and games portfolio, a bunch of, got to build a big education data platform in partnership with the Gates Foundation. So just really got to touch a wide variety of things. And I think the arc for me over that time and since has been just getting closer and closer to the teaching and learning moments, and where the real impact happens in the classroom, and really getting to kind of turn my skills as a technologist and as a product developer towards solving these persistent challenges that stand in the way of impact and learning gains and engagement for kids. So that's what really animates me.
Okay, so you just shared that you were talking and learning and thinking about machine learning and AI before the chat GPT explosion that brought it to the forefront of most
Yeah.
people's minds. So let's talk a little bit about, in your position, and also your own experience and history, what has changed and what has remained the same in this sphere of emergent technologies as it relates to the way we see it right now?
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed in the power of the tools. You can sort of trace back to the neural networks that have been around for decades, some of the core techniques that are used, but in the AI that we know today. But the power of the models that we have today, the volume of data that they're trained on, the pace at which they're moving, the ease with which application developers can integrate them into their solutions, uh, is just worlds beyond where we were a couple decades ago when I started working in the space. So tremendously more powerful. I mean, that's why you're seeing so many solutions popping up. I think the thing that remains the same is that as a product developer, kind of leveraging AI, you still need to be rooted in the challenges, the needs, the problems that you're solving for. And there is this temptation when you've got this very flexible, adaptable, like generalized model in, say, ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic, to just kind of wrap a thin veneer for your vertical on that and kind of unleash it. And that doesn't really cut it because you know, you really got to be oriented towards the particular solutions, the particular language and vernacular, and regulatory constraints of the space that you're working in. So, and for example, in education, there's been a lot of criticism for the sort of erosion of critical thinking when chatbots are used in an educational context and just are giving away the answer to kids, who are using them, and adults, who are using AI. And there's some evolution there. We now have models that are trained on more sort of Socratic, data sets that come from tutoring. Like I love the emergence of TeachLM out of Stanford. And that's a good example of like taking the right approach and really focusing on what are the unique needs in a particular space and evolving solutions. So that I would say is the persistence through line for me. Yeah.
You covered a lot there, but my big takeaway from the conversation is how we're using the technology in order
Yeah.
to affect change in classrooms. So then bring us to what problem were you solving in the creation of OKO Labs?
Yeah, so the problem that I'm solving at OKO Labs really came from talking to educators as I was thinking back in 2019, 2020. Again, still kind of chat GPT explosion. Some of the technologies were around, they existed, they weren't hugely popular yet. And I was thinking about like how they would really impact, again, those teaching and learning moments in the classroom. And I decided to just go out and ask a whole bunch of educators, like dozens of educators, education leaders, what would you do if an extra set of hands showed up to help you in the classroom one day? And what I heard time and time again was I would pull a small group. And that was no surprise. Like we all know as people in education and educators that small group work is like such a powerful technique for reaching each and every learner and differentiating your instruction. Um, but what I found as I dug deeper was that it was like really, really hard for many educators to pull off effectively. Like they didn't have those extra sets of hands in the classroom. We're stuck, being the sage on the stage. And they didn't have the resources to help them do anything different. The curricula don't support it. There are really no supplementals out there that support small group work as a first class citizen. And so that really got me like digging into this, first the small group challenge. What I realized though, as I continued to peel back the onion, is that what you can do in a small group is leverage the social power of the group, leverage it to exercise collaboration skills, communication skills, critical thinking, along with academic content. And so, really saw this opportunity in between all the whole classroom, kind of sage on the stage and smartboard type solutions, and all the one-to-one, chat bots and intelligent tutors and other supplementals, and really focus on the small group work as a lever for simultaneously developing both academic skills and competencies with the kind of durable 21st century skills that we know kids really need to thrive in their life and their careers. Yeah.
The way that the tool promotes collaboration is what hooked me and has me lit up. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about why collaboration and how it like really resonates in the social and emotional space of bringing academics and other aspects of children's learning together.
Yeah, it's interesting. We didn't actually start on OKO in a sort of with a highly collaborative model. We just started with a somewhat more structured kind of learning experience. It was very turn-based. We had OKO managing turns and using computer vision to detect hand raises and other gestures to facilitate turn taking. Kids would take turns solving like a puzzle or math problem. And then when we started getting OKO to ask open-ended questions like, oh, could you explain your thinking? Or does anybody in the group have an alternative solution? We saw kids kind of light up when they had the opportunity to share their thinking with one another, when they had the opportunity to support one another or ask a peer for help and frame a question to the group. And we're like, oh, yes, of course. There's something here when we sort of give kids agency, we normalize productive struggle by encouraging them to ask questions and not just focus on the right answer and interrogate their misconceptions and wrong answers and identify assets. Like that just really lit up the group. So we found that it was just both a powerful tool for engagement and getting kids to really, sort of lock into the learning experience and the academic content, which is often challenging, rigorous. Um, and also simultaneously develop deeper conceptual understanding. So they kind of evolved over time, and we've really leaned into that. So now, like an example of a learning activity that we've evolved to from a very turn-based kind of collaboration mechanic is a consensus building mechanic. So we have a game called Let's Talk, where the group, small group, typically 3 to 5 kids, they're presented with a math challenge, puzzle, assessment, or practice item, depending on what's selected by their educator. And they're first asked to kind of try it out on your own. Don't worry about getting the right answer. Think about the problem. Think about some questions you might have about it if it's challenging for you. And then after a little bit of time in sort of personal independent reflection on the problem, we then move into team time. And we prompt the group to try and solve it together, see if they can figure it out. And have a whole bunch of facilitation moves that are all kind of research backed. And more recently, what we've done to support sort of social emotional learning more deeply, we actually received a grant from the Math Narrative Project, phenomenal sort of research-backed initiative to help build students' math identity and counter some of the negative, negative narratives out there around, math identities and who can or cannot be good at math. And what it means to be good at math. So we've infused a lot of those learnings to help build a growth mindset, help build that positive math identity, encourage the use of mathematical language throughout our facilitation. So it's turned into a much more fluid, dynamic, kind of open-ended sort of learning experience in OKO, all facilitated by OKO as the AI, kind of supplementing the teacher in the classroom. Yeah.
I learned every kid is a math kid from Shalini Sharma in her book Math
Yeah,
Mind.
yeah,
Big,
yeah,
big, big fan of the book. But
yeah.
it's funny because I have a home where my 2 children love math. And it's actually the other one that I have to convince them, like, not you're a math kid. Everyone's a math kid. It's you're a reading kid and a writing kid. And that's so funny because for me, like
Yeah,
that's my sweet spot. But they are leaning in hard to, oh, I'm a math guy. I'm a math guy.
that's great.
But
That's
I know
great.
not every kid feels that. So
Yeah, that's it.
you really have to foster that and make sure that we give children the ability to see their identity as multifaceted, not just, oh, I'm a soccer player, as kids often defer to being, or like I'm a theater girl or a theater guy. But having these multiple identities by getting success and feeling success in the areas they don't previously feel it.
100%, 100%. And I hear that from students all the time. We do a lot of co-design work. I love to go into classrooms and see OKO in action and debrief with kids afterwards. And we're hearing from one girl and she told me that she just had not been a math person.
Mm,
She, really didn't like it. And when her educator, teacher introduced OKO into the classroom and she got to learn with her peers and talk with her peers, she was like, I don't feel afraid of making mistakes anymore. I enjoy it more. I love getting to talk about it. My friends can help me out. I'm now helping out my friends. And she's like, I
mm.
just want to do more, do more of this and learn in this social context. So one of the ways I think about it is that we all know about now about the 5% problem, where so many like EdTech interventions are built for kind of the 5% of students who are intrinsically motivated to learn through that modality,
Yes.
and they don't end up, the 95% don't end up getting the adequate dosage because they're not engaged by that model. Like, we're really building for the other 95%, and building so that they can learn. Today it's math. In the future, we'll talk about this more, we really see it expanding across subjects. um, Learn in a social setting, learn through collaboration, and simultaneously practice those typically like black box sort of skills of collaboration, communication, critical thinking, problem solving, productive struggle.
Matt, you've alluded a couple times here to the growth of the market in ed tech
Mhm,
that with
mhm,
tools that are AI, like origin is AI or they're
mhm,
AI wrappers. And, you know, we could probably talk for days about why that's concerning, but I am curious because a lot of folks in this space, both CEOs and founders themselves, but also funders and nonprofit leaders. I mean, you are deeply, deeply woven into the fabric of education, despite you not being an educator yourself.
mhm,
You've spent your career caring about how to solve problems with kiddos.
mhm,
And I'm curious, where do you think this space is going? We've had a little bit of a high and a low in terms of investment cycles and a
mhm,
hype cycle with AI. And now we have a federal government that's, leaving lots of questions for folks. So what do you think is coming and how are you like approaching the continued forward momentum of what you've built with that in mind?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a storm right now for sure. But I take solace in the fact that all storms run out of rain eventually. And you know, but that is I think also an informed position. So my take, looking at the space is the challenges, the needs, which I talked about earlier, the gaps that core curricula leave in helping educators to truly like metabolize new ways of teaching and learning and implement, discourse rich, small group work in their classroom. Those needs are persistent. They still exist. We still have, a saddening number of students proficient on NAEP in both fourth and eighth grade, in both math and literacy. So we have these persistent challenges. And yes, we've just, thrown in a whole bunch of budget uncertainty to school systems that they have to grapple with in solving those challenges. But, you know, all of the school leaders that I know are motivated by outcomes. When there are solutions that, you know, have evidence that they work, and they have evidence that they can be absorbed and metabolized by educators in the classroom and by school systems and be adopted, and they have those proof points, and they present a cost-effective way of solving those persistent challenges. I think there's still space for ed tech vendors and solutions to thrive. Um, And like we'll also see, because it's harder to be a startup, it's harder to break through in sort of a budget sensitive climate. We'll also see a lot more consolidation. We'll see a lot more, companies either folding or getting gobbled up. We will see one of the things that, the paths that we've taken, we'll see a lot of companies seed strapping, like being highly capital efficient, like,
Yeah.
maybe being a little more patient with how they achieve growth, but ultimately breaking through, just by being creative, being capital efficient, and building an evidence base, showing that you work, and gaining more and more school partners over time. Um, I think the other important trend I see, which I think will help enable some of the consolidation, which is probably ultimately healthy for the market, um, is the sort of elevated importance of coherence right now. We've had over the past several decades, due to just the fragmentation of our education market, different state standards, different policies, like different ways of in procurement processes. Like it's a very fragmented market from state to state and often from district to district. That has led to fragmented solutions that
Mhm.
start off in one district building for a sort of unique way of teaching and learning, that then like don't translate as well and don't work with the other tools and curricula in place somewhere else. Like we're starting to see a lot more attention on coherence, being able to integrate and align at a minimum with the standards, and the next level with the scope and sequence of particular curricula, so that it's easier for educators to absorb and make use of some of the critical supplementals that fill gaps left by their core curricula. So that I think is an important trend as well. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Like with everything you've said, I feel exactly the same. I had a chance to sit down with the outcomes-based contracting folks that I met through Aaron Moat at EdTech Week.
Mhm.
And it was such a fascinating conversation how they operate. They basically have schools in mind and go to vendors and say, this school needs your tool. Are you willing to do outcome-based contracting so that they can implement quickly? And, that's a win-win for everyone, especially if you deeply believe in your tool. But if you don't, I guess it's a problem for you. And, I think it's so funny. I've been in ed tech for about 9 years, and watching some people drive headfirst towards research orientation while others just kind of stagnate, it is really coming to bear right now with schools being strapped. And also like with the elimination of ESSER funds, earlier this year, at the end of last year, as it slowly started to dry out, schools had to get rid of tools. So to your point, they are not getting tools that work, rid of tools that work for children, which I mean is a great bet to make. Let's build tools that work in
Yep.
schools and help kids grow. Like that feels really solid to me. That's a path that
Yeah.
I want to be on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's great to like underscore the importance of evidence right now. And I do love the sort of growth of the outcomes-based contracting movement. Actually, another OKO advisor is Raymond Pierce, who's the president of the Southern Education Foundation, which is the home of the outcomes-based contracting, or the Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting. So huge fan. Actually, about a decade ago at Amplify, we tried to engage with districts in an outcomes-based way. And at the time, districts were really ill prepared to do that. Like the
Mhm.
idea that you would structure an agreement that you pay X dollars, flat, and then you'd have to pay more dollars based on outcomes. Like it was anathema at the time. And it's great to see a lot more districts sort of figuring out how to procure in that way. And then on the other side of the market, a lot more vendors being willing to play ball and stand behind their outcomes, which we 100% are. I think it's still needs some maturation. There aren't that many districts out there that are yet doing OBC. It's taken a little bit more root in like tutoring, high impact and high dosage tutoring
Mhm.
models. A little bit less in supplementals, where it's traditionally a little more challenging to agree on what the outcomes are, and the ability to sort of isolate the impact of supplementals on those outcomes. But I think we'll get there 100%, and really excited by that.
No, it is so exciting. It definitely needs time to take root a bit more. And I
Yeah,
think there are still folks that hear OBC and they're like, what? But
yeah,
there's enough movement in the right direction that it has me
yeah.
really excited. We can continually offer schools great options that we know work for kids and that aren't just to cover bases,
Mhm.
as which can often be the case. Matt, you've had a lot of experience here in the space, just really developing tools in partnership with school districts and based on need in this co-design process, which is not new, but is I think unfortunately underutilized very often in ed tech. Talk to me a little bit about how co-design has helped, like what you've built in the past or even now, evolve, and why you continue to lean on co-design as you build.
Yeah, so one of the first things we did at OKO before we really allowed the product to get built was to engage in a whole co-design cycle in partnership with the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. And so we worked with researchers, we worked with educators, we worked with kids, and went through a very exploratory and really fun, but also sometimes like really challenging, process of imagining what OKO could be. And so co-design is very much at our core. We actually recently just went through a new cycle of co-design, imagining some of the future ways in which OKO can show up in the classroom. So it's been a through line in our work. And I think we've done a good job of pairing that with actual evidence collection, like in school systems. So it's great to be informed by co-design and co-creation. And a lot of what we see in OKO today really came out of those sessions with kids, with educators. But you also got to be rooted in the literature, the research, like what works, what do we know will work. That's where a lot of the like learning activities, the sort of that we facilitate, the facilitation moves themselves. That's where they all come from, and then you got to actually measure. And so, does this work? And so, we've been fortunate to have a longstanding research partnership with Hamilton County Schools in Tennessee, with Condesi Schools, a phenomenal charter network in Atlanta, where we've now conducted multiple studies showing exciting learning gains when kids are using OKO in the classroom, and also, really importantly, to speak to those social emotional benefits, reductions in math anxiety. I was like elated when we did pre and post surveys, and when we saw those results, it was like, yes, this is what we have been working towards. So to see it borne out in the evidence was phenomenal. We're actually preparing now for our first randomized control trial that we'll be doing in the spring with Hamilton County. So stay tuned for some even more robust evidence.
I can't wait to see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Matt, you've touched on a lot of what are kind of gold standards for tool creation and, how to exist in this ecosphere. I listen to a lot of people share how they're building, what they're building, both on this podcast, but also when I'm out in the world and I have my own experiences. I'm curious what advice you would give an ed tech founder who's just entering the ecosystem today. As my first
yeah,
question. This is my tweak, as you know.
yeah, yeah. I love it. I think I have two pieces of advice that are complementary. One is it's never too early to do research. It starts with being research backed, understand the literature, steep yourself in the learning sciences, engage with the research community. There's a lot to learn there. I get it being like a technologist coming to EdTech, like you want to go fast, you want to, build product, you want to be responsive to user needs, but triangulate that with the research, engage in co-design, which is a research-backed practice. And there's always, as you go down the path of building a product, building a business in education, there is always stage appropriate research. You want to measure impact all along the journey. That can be done internally. You can start to introduce some kind of pre-post types of measures that give you leading indicators of learning gains and engagement, whatever it is that are your levers for impact. But there is always stage appropriate and budget sensitive research that you can do to start to demonstrate why what you're doing works for yourself, for your investors, for your customers. Speaking of investors, that's my second piece of advice. There are funders out there who are aligned with an evidence-backed approach. It's not necessarily the big VCs that everybody wants to court and get those big checks from. And there are funders out there who are aligned with an evidence-backed approach. We've been really successful in not only garnering equity investors who care about the evidence, but also non-dilutive grant funding from the education department, IES under Ed Metz, from the Gates Foundation, from Accelerate, who's been a phenomenal funder of ours, New Schools Venture Fund. So there are dollars out there that can support the sort of evidence-based approach, and I think is much more aligned with the sort of pace and needs of the education market.
Amazing. Matt, you've given such great insight into building in today's education environment, but also really good advice to other founders and champions out there. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was as great as I hoped it would be and knew it would be.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Haley. This was a long time coming, and I'm glad we did it. What a fun conversation.
I know, and we could talk for days about all
I
these
know, we could
topics,
keep
but
going.
I really had to cut myself off. Often when Matt and I see each other or connect, it takes way more time than we were planning, and it's always such a fruitful conversation. I learned so much, and I feel so much joy. So thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing that with our audience.
Thanks for having me, Haley.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.